Imagine for a moment the first light of morning breaking over the horizon. You stand in the silence of that hour when the world has not yet hurried itself into noise. In that stillness, the light appears almost fragile, yet within it, there is power strong enough to dissolve the darkness of the night. This is where our journey begins. At the dawn of consciousness, the hidden cause behind every effect you will ever know. As Emmet Fox once taught, the outward world you see is but the mirror of your inner life. So before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. The truth we uncover here is simple, yet it cuts sharper than any doctrine the world has handed you. Everything begins in consciousness. Before the shape of a day, there's a thought. Before a building, a song, a relationship, or even the smallest act of kindness, there is an idea, a spark, a seed that precedes it all. You cannot hold supply in your hand until the cause has first taken root within your mind. The light comes before the heat, the seed comes before the harvest, the thought comes before the form. But you, like so many, have been taught to chase supply as though it were the beginning. You were told to measure your life by the balance of your accounts, the possessions in your grasp, or the approval you earn from others. And so, you ran outward, reaching for what seemed solid, only to find that supply without consciousness is like mist. It slips away the moment you try to hold it. Let me tell you a story. A man once woke before dawn, restless in his pursuit of wealth. He thought, if only I had more, I would finally feel safe. Day after day, he hurried from opportunity to opportunity, grasping for results that never satisfied. The more he gained, the less he trusted it would last. His life was like standing on sand, crumbling beneath his weight. One morning, tired of the chase, he paused long enough to notice the sunrise. And in that silence, it struck him. All that he sought outside was only the echo of what he carried within. For the first time, he turned his gaze inward, and there, he found the seed of cause. His wealth had never been outside his consciousness. Supply was the reflection, not the root. You may feel echoes of that man in your own story. You may know the exhaustion of pursuing security as though it were hiding somewhere beyond your reach. Yet the revelation stands. Consciousness is cause. Supply is effect. When you accept this, you stop fighting shadows. You stop mistaking reflections for sources. You realize that the dawn does not beg the night to leave, it simply rises, and darkness dissolves. So it is with your awareness. This first light is not about positive thinking in shallow terms. It is not about repeating empty phrases or pretending challenges do not exist. It is about recognizing that every state of consciousness produces its own offspring. Fear births confusion. Anger breeds resistance. Gratitude cultivates abundance. Clarity generates direction. And when your consciousness shifts, supply bends in response. Not because supply is the master, but because it has never been more than the servant of cause. Do not let the world deceive you into thinking that circumstances are tyrants. They are mirrors. They follow the movement of your inner dawn. Just as no sunrise ever asks permission from the night, you need not wait for outer evidence before affirming the truth within you. Consciousness leads, effect follows. So here, at the first light, you stand invited into a new responsibility. No longer a victim of conditions, no longer a beggar at the door of supply, you are the cause. What you allow in thought, in belief, in focus, this is what will inevitably appear. You cannot plant weeds and expect roses. You cannot harbor scarcity and call for abundance. The soil of mind is honest, it returns exactly what is sown. This is the revelation of the dawn. Your life is not controlled by what others give or withhold, but by the consciousness you cultivate. The morning asks you, what will you plant today? Will you repeat the restless search for supply outside, or will you choose to stand in the light of cause? Because once you choose cause, supply becomes effortless. It becomes as natural as the sunrise, as inevitable as the turning of the earth. You will not need to grasp or clutch. You will not fear its departure. You will know that supply was never first. Consciousness was. and consciousness remains. Here in the Church of the Dawn, the first light is not just a symbol, it is the truth you are invited to live. Let this section open in you the awareness that the dawn is not outside your window, it is inside your mind, breaking even now. The horizon of your mind stretches further than you once believed. As the first light expands, you begin to notice how the outer edges of your life, the challenges, the limitations, the patterns that repeat, are not random at all. They are horizons drawn by the very thoughts you have allowed to live in you. Every ceiling you have ever touched, every barrier you have ever faced, is the shadow cast by an inner conviction. Consciousness sets the frame and supply simply colors within it. Think of the times you told yourself, "This is as far as I can go." That quiet verdict, whispered inside, created the boundary long before circumstances confirmed it. And then, as if life were conspiring against you, situations rose up to prove you right. Yet they were not proof of fate, they were reflections of your own horizon. You were gazing at a landscape painted by your consciousness, mistaking it for the whole world. The truth is, no limit can hold except the ones you authorize. And this is where the revelation sharpens. Consciousness is not only cause, it is the architect of every horizon you encounter. If you accept smallness in thought, you inherit smallness in effect. If you hold fear as your compass, you will travel only within its map. But if you expand consciousness, the horizon itself stretches, and what once looked like an impassable edge dissolves into a pathway. Consider again the seeker from the story. After that dawn moment, he did not become instantly wealthy or suddenly free of struggle, but something inside shifted. He began to notice how every business failure had been seeded by hidden fear of loss, how every strained relationship had carried his own conviction that love must be earned. His horizon had been drawn not by chance, but by consciousness. And as he widened his inner lens, possibilities he once dismissed began to appear. Doors he had never seen were already waiting. This is not abstract theory. Look closely at your own life. Recall an area where you feel blocked, perhaps in work, in love, in health. Trace it back, and you will find a belief running quietly in the background, setting the boundaries. It might sound like I am not enough, or I never get a break, or life is against me. That belief, accepted as truth, becomes the architect of your horizon. The supply that flows or fails to flow merely obeys the blueprint you have handed it. So ask yourself, not in a moment of pause, but in the flow of this dawn conversation, what horizon have I drawn for myself without realizing? Where have I mistaken effect for cause and thus blamed the mirror instead of adjusting the gaze? The morning grows brighter, and with it comes an invitation. You are not trapped by the edges you see. They are not walls, they are outlines waiting to be redrawn. The same way the sky expands with the rising sun, your consciousness can expand, and supply will follow its lead. And this brings us closer to the hidden root that underlies it all, the seed from which every horizon and every effect first springs. The hidden root is never dramatic at first glance. It's small, quiet, and easily overlooked, yet it determines everything that follows. Thought is that root. Thought is the seed. Before any condition takes shape in your life, a pattern of thinking has already been planted, watered, and allowed to take hold. Planting often looks like repetition, an idea rehearsed in private, a phrase you carry through the day, an image you return to when no one is watching. The soil of mind does not debate. It simply grows what it receives. Seeds do not argue, they express their nature. Plant an apple seed, and you will not get thorns. Sow resentment, and it will not bloom into trust. The law is not punitive, it is precise. Consciousness is the orchard, and each idea carries the blueprint of its fruit. This is why trying to change conditions without addressing causes feels like pruning a shadow. You trim the symptom, and it returns because the root remained intact. When you shift thought at the level of cause, the branches of circumstance must alter. As Emmet Fox taught with clarity, change your thought, and you change your world. Not because slogans hypnotize reality, but because effect cannot resist its cause. See how this operates in the ordinary places of your day. A thought of scarcity, subtle, almost reasonable, produces choices shaped by fear. You hesitate to invest in learning, grasp at short-term gains, and close your hand when generosity would have opened doors. Those choices create results that look like proof: thin margins, brittle alliances that confirm the fear that started them. Then the mind says, "See, I was right," and the loop tightens. Break the loop at the root, and the pattern begins to loosen. The seeker learned this gradually. He kept a simple ledger beside his decisions. What thought preceded this choice? He discovered that loss prevention guided him more than vision. A single belief, "If I don't control everything, it will collapse," made him micromanage people until the best ones quietly withdrew. When he traced the outcomes back, he could locate the seed every time. It was humbling, not shaming. Humility gave him permission to replant. Replanting is not denial, it is precision. You select a seed by choosing the thought you will entertain with feeling and continuity. Intention is the seed coat. Feeling moistens it. Repetition becomes rain. Attention is sunlight. Expectancy is the climate that tells the seed it is safe to emerge. Gratitude enriches the soil. Honesty keeps it free of stones. If you keep tearing the ground open every hour to check the progress, you injure what you intend to grow. Patience is not passivity, it is agricultural wisdom. This is the discipline of inner agriculture. Each morning you plant on purpose, a clear vision, phrased simply enough to recall when stress arrives, a handful of statements you believe just enough to practice, a calm decision about the tone you will carry into your tasks. Through the day, you guard the row. When worry tries to reseed the field, you don't wrestle with it. You return attention to the idea you've chosen to nurture. Not because you deny facts, but because you know that attention is water and neglect is drought. Some seeds look harmless, yet they choke the field. Envy cloaks itself as comparison and saps the joy from your work. Cynicism poses as sophistication and salts the soil where vision might have taken root. Resentment coils around tender shoots until nothing new can rise. Pulling these is not a moral theater, it is necessity. You release people from your judgment because your harvest requires open channels. You forgive because the field needs space. You choose clarity over cleverness because clarity lets roots run deep. Power does not arrive from outside. It flows along the furrows you have prepared, the way water follows the lines drawn by a farmer's hand. When thought aligns with truth, movement becomes quiet and efficient. You make fewer frantic motions and more decisive ones. You stop scattering seed to win the approval of passers-by and start planting according to a design that matches your calling. Some days accomplish more with fewer gestures because cause is concentrated and effect has a clear path to follow. This work is beautifully ordinary. No incense, no special hour required, though you may come to treasure the early light for how it steadies you. The seeker found his practice at the kitchen table with a notebook and coffee. He wrote one sentence each day that expressed the seed he intended to plant. I conduct my affairs in faith, not fear. Then he looked for a single action that agreed with that seed. A phone call made without stalling, an apology offered without defending, a generous tip left without fanfare. The actions were small, but they were aligned, and alignment is how seeds confess their future. Do not confuse this with pretending problems away. Real fields have storms. Some days the ground is muddy, and you track it into the house. Yet even storms serve. They test the depth of your roots and drive them deeper. You learn to brace without breaking, to bend without surrendering your seed. And when a season seems slow, you resist uprooting your intention in a fit of doubt. Germination is silent long before it is visible. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is often the sign of work happening underground. You may wonder how long this takes. That question belongs to the old habit of treating supply as master. When cause becomes your focus, time stops being an enemy to outrun and becomes the medium in which growth unfolds. You keep sowing. You keep tending. You celebrate sprouts without worshiping them, because they are not the source, they are the first signals that the law is in motion. You claim the dignity of responsibility. You are answerable for what you plant. And as the rows begin to green, something subtle happens in the landscape of your days. The mirror of life responds. Relationships soften. Ideas find you. Solutions that once seemed complicated resolve with a simple phone call. Supply begins to appear, not as the object of a chase, but as the natural outcome of causes you have tended with care. The seed is the secret, and the soil is ready. You have begun to plant with awareness, which means the harvest cannot help but take shape. As the tender shoots break the surface, the first glimmering reflections appear, early signals that your inner work is finding its form. The reflections you see around you are not the origin, though the world trains you to treat them as such. Supply the money in your account, the opportunities that arrive, the recognition you earn is not self-generated. It does not create itself. It mirrors the consciousness that gave it birth. When you treat the reflection as the source, you chase images, mistaking the shadow for the fire that casts it. This is why so many lie exhausted, moving from one effect to another, hoping that the next achievement will secure what the last one could not. You have already felt this cycle. The moment of gain followed by a deeper hunger. The job attained that still leaves you restless. The relationship secured that does not quiet your insecurity. The new possession that grows old the instant you own it. Each time you thought supply itself would heal the ache, only to find it empty without a new cause behind it. The illusion is powerful, but it cannot withstand the dawn light of understanding. Imagine standing before a mirror combing your hair. You notice a strand out of place, and you attack the mirror's image with a brush. You press against the glass, trying to change what you see by rearranging the reflection. Futile, yes, but this is precisely what happens when you battle effects while ignoring causes. The reflection is loyal to the reality before it. Change yourself and the mirror must yield. This is law. The seeker once fell hard into this trap. After realizing the seed of thought shaped his results, he returned to old habits of pursuing supply as if it were cause. He pushed harder at business, obsessed over numbers, measured his worth by profit sheets. And when those profits dipped, fear flooded back. He thought the problem was loss of supply. But what really withered was his consciousness. He had planted seeds of anxiety again, and the reflection obeyed. It was humbling to face, but it freed him once more. The effect is never to blame. And you, if you listen closely, already know this to be true in your own story. Think of moments when supply flowed with little effort. They were never born from frantic pursuit. They followed a state of mind, clarity, creativity, generosity. The pay raise came after you carried yourself with new confidence. The opportunity arrived when you stopped grasping and began serving. The relationship deepened when you no longer needed it to prove your value. The effect never led, because always whispered first. The danger of worshiping supply is that it makes you its prisoner. You live at the mercy of appearances, enslaved by numbers and circumstances, bending your mood to every rise and fall. But the dawn does not tremble, because the night resists. It rises, and the night vanishes. When you turn from reflection to source, you recover freedom. You stop begging from the mirror, and instead shape what it reflects. To live this way is to remember, moment by moment, that the law does not fail. The outer world has no independence of its own. It only reports, and if you dislike its report, do not curse the messenger. Change the message you are sending from within. This is not denial, it is mastery. You acknowledge what appears, but you deny it final authority. You recognize it as effect, and then you recenter in cause. The dawn within you is steady. It does not flicker when conditions shift. Like the sun, it keeps rising. And as it does, the mirrors of supply will follow, rearranging themselves to reflect what consciousness has chosen. You will no longer confuse the shadow for the source. You will look past effects with calm, knowing that each one is nothing more than a faithful image of the cause you hold. And as this recognition deepens, you will be asked to face the great illusion that binds nearly every seeker, the illusion of lack. An empty cup on the table can look final. It sits in silence, convincing you that nothing more is available. In the same way, scarcity appears persuasive. It takes the shape of unpaid bills, empty calendars, strained relationships, and whispers that this is how it will always be. Yet what appears as lack is not a fixed reality. It is, in effect, an echo of thoughts entertained too long. There are nights when scarcity feels like the only voice in the room. The silence around you seems to agree with it, and every number, every absence, appears to confirm its verdict. In those moments, it is tempting to call lack a master. But dawnlight reveals otherwise. What looks like absence is never original, only reflected. Consciousness stands behind it, steady as the unseen sun before sunrise. One man once believed otherwise. He worked long hours, convinced that struggle was the only road to provision. When profits fell, he panicked. When savings rose, he clutched them with fear. His mood rose and fell with numbers on a page. For years, he mistook those numbers for the source of his life. Only later, after much exhaustion, did he notice the pattern. Every dip followed a season of anxious thought. Every breakthrough followed a season of inner steadiness. Supply was never leading him. It was following the signal of his consciousness. Scarcity thrives on two illusions. First, that it exists independently of thought. Second, that it is permanent. Both are untrue. Shortage cannot appear unless first invited by belief, and no effect can endure beyond the cause that sustains it. Think of the night sky, vast, overwhelming, seemingly endless. Yet, as the horizon brightens, darkness retreats without resistance. Lack behaves the same way when consciousness turns toward abundance. Notice how fear of not enough distorts daily life. Worry about limited time drives you to rush, and rushing wastes the very hours you were desperate to save. Fear of not being loved makes you cling, and clinging pushes affection away. Anxiety over money prompts you to withhold, and withholding seals the doors through which more might have entered. Scarcity bends perception until actions align with it, creating outcomes that appear as proof. The loop closes and you call it reality. But it is only reflection. Understanding this gives you new authority. Instead of wrestling with effects, you return to the seed. Ask yourself, not with shame, but with clarity, what belief am I planting? The answer may sting at first, but it liberates you. Because once you see that the shortage you face is not punishment, but the product of a misseeded thought, you can begin again. Life itself teaches this lesson if you watch. Nature overflows, trees yield more fruit than needed, rivers pour without measure, stars scatter light beyond counting. Abundance is the native law. Scarcity is the shadow cast only when consciousness turns away from that law. Align again with life's order, and the current of provision resumes its flow. This does not mean you ignore the facts before you. A low balance is real enough on paper. A season of loneliness can ache in the heart. But facts are effects, not origins. They report on what has been believed, not on what must be. Acknowledging them without surrendering to them is strength. You can say, yes, the account is thin, but it is only a fact. Yes, this season is dry, but it is only reflection. The cause within me is greater, and it can be renewed. Gratitude becomes a powerful tool here. A man who once despaired of his lack began writing down 3 evidences of abundance each morning: the meal before him, the friend who reached out, the strength in his body. These were not grand proofs, but they were seeds. With each entry, he trained his consciousness to notice presence instead of absence. Slowly, opportunities surfaced, not because they had been absent, but because his awareness had been blind. Gratitude had opened his eyes to what was already near. When lack presses hardest, remember that dawn does not argue with night. It rises. Scarcity may insist it is permanent, but it cannot survive a shift in cause. Turn your gaze inward, choose a seed of abundance, water it with gratitude, and hold it steady. The reflection will have no choice but to follow. And as the illusion of lack fades, another turn in the journey calls you to redirect your vision even more deliberately away from chasing effects and toward the still center of mind, where transformation truly begins. The turning point always arrives when you shift the gaze inward. Until then, energy leaks outward, chasing outcomes, negotiating appearances, wrestling with reflections. But the law of mind is not altered by effort at the surface. The root is always inside, and transformation begins when attention returns to its center. Think of a lamp. The light it casts depends on the bulb within, not the shadows across the wall. You can move furniture, paint surfaces, or adjust mirrors, but until the bulb changes, the glow remains the same. So it is with consciousness. Outer adjustments may bring temporary relief, but enduring change requires tending to the inner source that projects them all. This is the mistake nearly everyone makes, searching outside first. You reach for more hours to fix a schedule built on confusion. You hunt for new relationships to mend a loneliness that is rooted in self-doubt. You chase money to heal an insecurity that no figure could settle. These efforts exhaust because they address only the reflection, never the cause. When the cause remains unaltered, new circumstances appear, but they eventually echo the same pattern. A man once learned this with painful clarity. After months of chasing new ventures, every one of them collapsed under the same weight, his fear of not being enough. It was not the businesses that failed him, but the consciousness he carried into them. He finally sat alone asking, not what must I do next, but what belief is running me? That question opened the door. He saw that every plan he touched was stained by the conviction that he was inadequate. Until that seed was replaced, no outward strategy could thrive. The lesson is not to despise supply or to abandon ambition, but to reorder them. Seek first the cause. Establish the inner conviction, and let supply arrive as servant. This is why Emmet Fox spoke with such force. Consciousness is the starting line, supply the finish. When you honor the order, struggle subsides. When you reverse it, life becomes a treadmill motion without arrival. Turning inward does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means carrying into the world a steadier center. It is the difference between reacting and creating, between being driven by appearances and shaping them. You pause not to escape, but to align. You recognize the thoughts you are rehearsing, the emotions you are nourishing, and you choose deliberately which ones will continue. This practice is quiet, but it is not passive. It requires vigilance. You may notice an anxious thought rising, I will never get ahead. Instead of letting it burrow into soil, you meet it with truth. Consciousness is cause, and I am planting abundance now. You do not need to shout it. You need to believe it enough to repeat it. Over time, the repetition roots deeper than the old fear. When you begin to live this way, circumstances may not shift at once, but your perception does. And perception is the gatekeeper of experience. You see opportunities where before you saw walls. You treat setbacks as temporary, not as identity. You hold gratitude in small things, and that gratitude multiplies them. The outer horizon bends because the gaze has shifted. This is not mystical escapism. It is practical alignment. Farmers do not argue with fields, they plant intentionally. Musicians do not blame silence, they arrange sound within it. You do not quarrel with supply, you direct it by the consciousness you cultivate. Turning inward is not the luxury of the detached, it is the essential work of anyone who wishes to live causefully instead of reactively. And when this shift takes hold, something profound is revealed. The law that governs all of it, the order by which consciousness unfailingly precedes manifestation. The law of mind does not play favorites. It is not swayed by moods, personalities, or exceptions. It moves with precision as steady as gravity. Whatever consciousness impresses, the law unfolds. This is why understanding it is so liberating. You are not at the mercy of chance. You are subject to a law that never wavers, and once you work with it consciously, the results must follow. Imagine electricity. It is not good or bad, it simply flows according to the circuit prepared for it. With a proper channel, it lights a home. With a careless touch, it shocks. The power itself does not choose, it obeys structure. So it is with the law of mind. Consciousness provides the blueprint, the law brings it into visible form. Supply is not random reward or cruel trick. It is the echo of the design you hold inside. For too long, many have mistaken the law as something external, an abstract cosmic mechanism to study from afar. But it is as near as your breath, as immediate as your next thought. When fear is rehearsed, the law shapes conditions to match it. When clarity is held, the law arranges circumstances in its image. The sequence cannot be broken, cause first, effect after. This is the order etched into the structure of life itself. One traveler on this path once resisted the lesson. He believed his circumstances were special, exempt from such order. "Surely my lack is different," he said. "Surely my struggle is unique." And so he kept treating effects as if they held the authority of causes. Only when the cycle repeated again and again did he concede that his life was not proof against the law, but evidence of it. It humbled him into alignment. You may feel tempted to doubt it too. Perhaps you think your hardship is too great, or your mistakes too deep. Yet the law does not consult history before acting. It responds to consciousness now. This very moment, the seed you plant is already in the soil, and the law is already at work. The past may explain the present, but it cannot prevent the future. The cause you choose today is the cause that will bear tomorrow's effect. Understanding this removes superstition. You do not wait for luck, beg for supply, or fear invisible curses. You work with law. You recognize that each thought, sustained with feeling, is a blueprint handed to life. The law will not question it, it will only build. That responsibility is weighty, but it is also empowering. You are not helpless. You are the architect. And here is the gift. Once you grasp this order, you can predict the outcome by tending to the cause. Anxiety planted will yield restless fruit. Gratitude planted will yield provision in surprising forms. Doubt planted will strangle possibility. Vision planted will open unseen doors. You no longer ask, "Will it work for me?" The law is impartial. You ask instead, "What am I choosing to plant?" This clarity is not meant to make you fearful of every fleeting thought. It is the sustained, nourished ideas that shape supply, not passing sparks. But it does invite vigilance, a steady watch over what you repeat, what you entertain, what you feed with attention. That watchfulness is not paranoia, it is stewardship. You guard your consciousness because it is the only true soil you possess. And as you learn to work with the law in this way, another shadow will reveal itself, the subtle but powerful distortions of fear and doubt, the shadows that bend the flow of supply until you decide to master them. Fear and doubt creep in like shadows at dusk, quiet at first but stretching long until they cover everything in sight. They do not create reality, yet they distort it, bending the flow of supply into tangled channels. Consciousness, still the cause, becomes clouded by uncertainty, and the reflection answers with confusion. The law has not failed. It is faithfully returning what the seed has demanded. Consider how doubt works. A vision rises in you clear, bright, alive. For a moment you feel the strength of it. But then doubt whispers, "What if it doesn't work? What if I'm not enough? What if the world won't answer?" That whisper, if entertained, becomes louder than the vision itself. Soon your choices carry hesitation. You take half steps where bold ones were needed. You abandon projects at their midpoint. Supply, receiving mixed instructions, responds with mixed results. And then you call it failure, when in truth it was the shadow of doubt made visible. Fear operates the same way. It predicts loss, rehearses disaster, magnifies weakness. You begin guarding against calamities that have not arrived, and in that guarding you act small. The doors you might have walked through close, not because life has rejected you, but because fear made you shrink before you reached them. The law simply said yes to the pattern of thought you supplied. A story often helps anchor this truth. The man who once chased wealth outward had begun to understand the law of cause and effect, but he had not yet mastered the shadows. In his quiet hours, he still repeated fears, "What if it all disappears again? What if I fail once more?" And though he acted with new clarity by day, those seeds sown at night bore their fruit. Contracts slipped away. promises dissolved. He felt betrayed by life until he faced the mirror honestly. It was his own doubt reflected back. The lesson is not to despise fear or to condemn doubt. Shadows are teachers. They show you where consciousness still needs tending. To notice doubt is to be given a map of the places where you must replant. To feel fear is to discover the exact soil where courage must grow. When you see them this way, shadows lose their tyranny. They become signals instead of prisons. So how do you transform them? First, by awareness. Do not let them operate silently. Name them, bring them to the surface. Then by redirection. Do not fight them head-on, for wrestling shadows only deepens their grip. Instead, return attention to the cause you intend to plant. Repeat it, nourish it, act upon it. Let gratitude and expectancy water the new seed until its roots run deeper than fear. Transformation also requires practice. The man who had been haunted by loss began a new habit. Each time doubt whispered, he answered softly but firmly, "That is not my cause. My cause is clarity, my cause is abundance, my cause is faith." At first the words felt hollow, but over time, repetition gave them weight. Slowly, supply began to reflect the steadier state, and opportunities held instead of crumbling. You will face these shadows as surely as night follows day. But remember, night does not cancel the dawn. It prepares the sky for its brilliance. So it is with fear and doubt. When you learn to meet them without surrender, they become the backdrop against which your new consciousness shines brighter. And once the shadows are recognized and transformed, the soil clears for something far more powerful to rise, the conscious cultivation of inner abundance, a steady practice of generating clarity, gratitude, and expectancy that no shadow can eclipse. Discipline turns the dim room bright. Not through force, not by shouting affirmations into the air, but by the steady governance of thought, choosing what will be allowed to live in you and what will not. Doubt and fear do not evaporate on their own. They yield to consistent direction. This is where you become cause in a deliberate way. You stop being a tenant in your own mind and take up the role of a careful steward, shaping what the law will soon reproduce as form. Begin with recognition. Shadows gain strength when unnamed. You notice the subtle phrases that try to pass as a reason. It's safer to expect less. Opportunities never come twice. If I relax, everything will fall apart. They sound like wisdom, yet they are merely old agreements. Recognition is not condemnation, it is clarity. Once you see the pattern, you are free to choose again. Consciousness, once aware, is already stronger than the habit it observes. Choice follows recognition. You select a governing idea, a sentence simple enough to remember under pressure, true enough to carry weight. Consciousness is cause, I plant abundance now. Or I conduct my affairs in faith, not fear. This is not decoration, it is seed. You keep it near, not as a charm, but as a premise from which you will act. The mind loves premises. Give it a worthy one, and it will begin to align your perceptions and decisions accordingly. Then comes rehearsal. Not theatrical, but faithful. You allow the governing idea to meet ordinary moments, the email that stirs anxiety, the invoice that arrives early, the conversation that threatens to spiral. Instead of letting the old narrative run, you return to the premise and ask, what would someone who truly believed this do next? Action rooted in cause becomes your rehearsal. You send the email with calm clarity. You call the vendor without apology in your voice. You speak honestly without defensiveness. Each small act tutors the nervous system to trust the new pattern. Embodiment matters. Thought that never touches posture, and tone remains fragile. You notice your shoulders rising when worry speaks, and choose to let them settle. You slow your pace not to pretend, but to agree with the truth you're planting. A steady body lends credibility to a steady mind. This is not performance, it is congruence. When inner cause and outer bearing match, the law reads a clear instruction. Guarding the field is part of the craft. You will encounter triggers that once dragged you into rehearsing scarcity. A message left on read, a colleague's success, an unexpected bill. The reflex returns, but reflex is not command. You acknowledge the pull without obeying it, and you pivot to the premise. At first, the pivot feels effortful. Soon it becomes your new default. Musicians call this muscle memory. Metaphysicians might call it the stabilization of cause. There is also pruning. Some thoughts are not vicious weeds, just weak branches that siphon sap from the trunk. Endless comparison. Subtle sarcasm about your own efforts. Entertainment that trains your imagination to expect collapse. You reduce their airtime, not to live narrowly, but to create space for what feeds the governing idea. Pruning is not punishment, it is conservation. A focused field yields a richer harvest. Accountability deepens the work. You can keep a brief ledger, not of outcomes, but of causes. 1 line a day, premise chosen. Situation met, action taken. Patterns emerge. You see where the premise holds and where it slips. You notice which hours require extra vigilance. This is not self-surveillance, it is craftsmanship. Builders check their levels, pilots scan their instruments, you review your causes. As clarity strengthens, doubt does not vanish, it changes role. It becomes a signal that focus is thinning. Instead of spiraling, you treat doubt like the red indicator on a dashboard, refuel the premise. You return to gratitude not sentimental, but specific. Gratitude is a practical solvent. It dissolves the film of fear that gathers on perception and lets you see options that were hiding in plain sight. In gratitude, attention stops rehearsing absence and starts noticing presence, which invites supply to form along the lines of what is recognized. Forgiveness belongs here too, not as moral theater, but as mental hygiene. Resentment is expensive. It rents space in your thought and charges interest. Each time you replay a grievance, you water a seed that bears bitter fruit. Forgiveness clears the row. You release the story you keep building against them so you can build the life you are here to create. You are not excusing, you are economizing your power. Soon results begin to carry a different texture. Doors open with less rattling. Conversations land clean. Money that once felt skittish lingers long enough to be directed wisely. None of this is magic. Effect is obeying cause. You are no longer sending mixed signals, and the law is simply reporting a unified instruction. You will call it grace because it feels gracious, but it is also sequence. Consciousness, then supply. There will still be days with weather. A plan will delay, a partnership will part, a figure will dip. You meet these without surrendering your premise. You do not deny winds, you trim the sail and keep the heading. This is the quiet courage discipline creates a refusal to let temporary appearances appoint themselves as truth. The governing idea remains and conditions recalibrate. As this steadiness matures, something more than steadiness awakens. A movement begins inside that feels like current, a sense of energy flowing through the channels you have prepared, finding its way into work, words, and relationships. It is not frantic. It is not loud. It is the natural consequence of alignment, a living momentum that carries your efforts farther than effort alone could push. That current is waiting just ahead, already gathering as consciousness clarifies. With the field tended and the premise firm, you are about to feel how power moves when thought aligns with truth, and how supply answers swiftly when the pathway is clear. When alignment deepens, a current of power begins to move. It is not dramatic like thunder, nor does it announce itself with noise. It flows quietly but with unmistakable force, like water pressing through a newly opened channel. This current has always been present, yet it was obstructed by contradiction, fear, and scattered thought. With consciousness unified, the flow is released, and you feel its transmission in the most ordinary moments. Notice how small actions take on unusual clarity. A conversation that once felt awkward unfolds smoothly. A decision that would have consumed hours now resolves in minutes. Even your physical presence shifts the way you walk, the tone you carry, the confidence in your eyes. These are not surface tricks. They are signs that inner cause and outer form are now aligned, and the current of truth is powering them. This power is not yours in the sense of ownership. It does not originate from personality or force of will. It belongs to the law itself, to the universal intelligence that honors every seed consciousness plants. When you align with truth, when your thoughts match the order of life, the power flows through you as naturally as breath. It does not strain. It does not falter. It simply moves along the pathways you have cleared. Think again of the man who once battled scarcity. After practicing vigilance over his thoughts, he began to notice subtle but undeniable shifts. Calls were returned that had long been ignored. A colleague suddenly remembered his name for a project. Conversations opened doors without him pushing them. He did not force these outcomes. They arose because his consciousness no longer sent mixed signals. The current was flowing, and supply was keeping pace. The beauty of this current is its impartiality. It does not amplify only grand projects. It animates the daily and the ordinary. Cooking a meal with presence, answering an email with calm clarity, offering a genuine word of encouragement, each becomes infused with the same current. And as these actions ripple outward, supply returns in unexpected forms. A meal cooked with love creates connection. An email written without tension yields cooperation. A kind word sown produces trust that later becomes opportunity. Skeptics may ask, isn't this just coincidence? But coincidence is simply a name for law in action before we recognize its pattern. When consciousness aligns, synchronicities multiply, not because fate has favored you, but because effect must mirror cause. What once looked random now reveals itself as rhythm. This current is steady, but it requires stewardship. It can be diluted if attention fractures again, if fear is given room to dominate, if old narratives are allowed to overtake the field. The law will not argue, it will simply follow the new instruction. This is why continued vigilance is essential. Not tense or paranoid, but attentive like a musician keeping an instrument tuned. The song flows best when the strings are kept true. As you practice, you learn to trust the current. You stop overworking because you see results emerging with less strain. You stop clutching because you realize supply is not fragile, it is simply responsive. You stop fearing loss because you know the cause remains with you, and the current will renew itself as long as you maintain alignment. This trust is not passivity, it is authority. You act decisively but without panic. You pursue opportunities but without desperation. The current of power is also contagious. Others feel it even if they cannot name it. They sense steadiness in your voice, clarity in your choices, a calmness in your presence. They are drawn to it not because you have manipulated them, but because power transmits naturally. Consciousness radiates and supply organizes around it. And so the lesson grows clearer. The current of power is always available, but its release depends on discipline. Once discipline steadies, the current moves freely. And once the current moves, you are called to hold vision steadily, even when appearances seem to resist, trusting that effect must yield to the cause you have planted. Holding vision is the quiet courage of this path. Anyone can believe when evidence agrees with them. Anyone can feel abundant when supply is overflowing. But to sustain a vision when appearances deny it, that is mastery. It is here that consciousness proves itself as cause, refusing to let temporary reflections dictate the story. Think of the farmer. After sowing seed, the field looks barren. Weeks may pass with no sign of life. The soil seems empty, and the temptation to declare failure is strong. But the farmer does not dig up the field to prove his fear. He trusts the unseen process, holding vision of harvest while the seed works beneath the surface. The discipline of patience makes him partner with the law of growth. In time, the field proves his trust. Life demands the same of you. Supply may not appear at once. Conditions may look stubborn. But if you abandon vision at the first contradiction, you sever the cause before effect can mature. Appearances are not verdicts, they are passing weather. The sun of consciousness is steady, and its light will draw forth results when the season is right. A man once faced this test after aligning his thought with abundance. Opportunities had begun to appear, yet suddenly one collapsed a deal withdrawn without explanation. The old fear surged back. See, nothing truly changes. For a moment, he nearly surrendered his vision, But then he remembered, the law does not fail. If supply withdrew, it was not loss but rearrangement. He chose to hold vision anyway, even while evidence mocked him. Weeks later, a larger door opened, one that would not have been possible had the first remained. Supply had been effect, and effect had obeyed a higher cause than he could yet see. Holding vision is not stubborn denial. It is anchored awareness. You acknowledge appearances without enthroning them. You admit the delay, the difficulty, the setback, but you declare them temporary. Your tone says, "This is passing, my cause remains." In doing so, you let the current of power continue its work uninterrupted. Doubt may still knock at the door, but you need not host it. Treat it as passing weather, not permanent residence. You return attention to the seed you have planted, feeding it with gratitude, protecting it with expectancy. Gratitude is not sentimental here, it is strategic. It focuses mind on presence, not absence, on sufficiency, not lack. And what you focus on, the law multiplies. At times, holding vision will feel lonely. Others may urge you to give up, to accept appearances as final. But remember, they are only describing the mirror, not the source. You do not need their agreement, you need only your own steadiness. Consciousness is cause, and one cause sustained is stronger than 100 wavering reflections. When you hold vision through contradiction, a shift occurs within. Confidence deepens. You realize that supply is not fragile, that circumstances cannot rob you of what originates inside. This inner security is itself a form of abundance, and it soon attracts its outer match. Supply begins to appear not as rescue, but as natural echo. This steadiness is what gives birth to the true emergence of dawn, the rising into a new state of being where consciousness no longer trembles before appearances, but radiates steadily, shaping effect as surely as the sun commands the morning sky. The dawn does not arrive with a single ray, it rises until the whole horizon glows. So it is when you begin to embody a higher consciousness. At first, there are glimpses, a conversation that unfolds without strain, an unexpected kindness, a bill that is met more smoothly than you feared. These are like the first streaks of light, proof that something is changing. But soon, the sky of your inner life grows brighter, and the evidence becomes steady. You are not visiting clarity anymore, you are dwelling in it. This is the emergence of the Church of the Dawn within you, the moment when consciousness becomes a sanctuary, a place of strength that travels with you everywhere. You no longer seek refuge in effects, asking them to reassure you. Instead, you carry refuge in cause, and supply follows naturally. The outer world begins to brighten, not because it has learned new tricks, but because you are standing in a new light. It is important to notice how this feels. The shift is not frantic. You are not constantly checking the mirror for signs. There is a calmness that surprises you, a steadiness you once thought impossible. You approach tasks with less tension, conversations with more presence, challenges with deeper confidence. These are not accidents, they are the reflections of a consciousness that has risen into dawn. One man described it as if he had been living in twilight for years. His efforts were constant, his worries louder than his rest, his victories fragile. But as his consciousness shifted, he began to feel as though the sun had broken through. Not everything was perfect, but everything was clearer. Even setbacks looked different. They no longer crushed him. He saw them as clouds drifting across a sky that remained bright behind them. His supply grew not only in finances, but in peace, in friendships, in health. The dawn had emerged, and he was living in its light. This rising does not mean you will never face shadows again. The world still carries its challenges, but you face them from higher ground. The difference is profound. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of fearing collapse, you expect renewal. When old habits try to return, you recognize them quickly, and they dissolve under the steadiness of your new state. As dawn becomes your atmosphere, others notice. They sense something has changed, even if they cannot name it. They see it in your calm under pressure, in your generosity, in the way opportunities seem to surround you. This is not performance, it is overflow. Consciousness has shifted, and supply reflects it without effort. Living in this new light is not about dramatic displays. It is about consistency. Each day you show up rooted in cause, and the effects arrange themselves accordingly. Over time, this becomes less a practice and more a nature. You are not trying to hold vision, you are vision. You are not striving to believe. Belief is your environment. The law of mind is no longer theory, it is lived reality. And as this embodiment deepens, you begin to act in a new way. You stop measuring life by appearances, and you start living causefully, choosing your thoughts, your focus, your actions with the quiet authority of one who knows they are shaping outcomes from within. Living by the law means you stop treating truth as a concept and start using it as a compass. Decisions no longer spring from panic, opinion, or comparison. They proceed from premise. You begin each day not by asking, "What does the world want from me?" but by setting the cause you intend to amplify. A simple line is enough: consciousness is cause, supply is effect. Then you act as if that sentence were the most practical tool you own, because it is. In practice, this looks beautifully ordinary. You open your calendar and treat it as an altar, not a battlefield. Instead of stuffing it with frantic tasks, you order it around your highest causes. Work that expresses clarity, service, and genuine value goes first. Noise goes last or leaves entirely. The arrangement is not aesthetic, it's metaphysical. Where attention goes, energy flows. Where energy flows, effect grows. A calendar set by cause becomes a quiet engine of provision. Your speech shifts too. Words are carriers of consciousness. They move law into motion. You stop narrating scarcity. Phrases like "I'm always behind," "nothing ever works," and "this market is impossible" used to sound like realism. Now they are recognized as planting instructions. You choose language that is accurate and oriented. This is challenging, and I am resourced to meet it. The path isn't visible yet, and I'm steady while it clears. This is not spin. It is stewardship over the seeds your mouth scatters all day. Money management changes from fear-based hoarding to intelligent stewardship. Budgets remain, but the mood inside them matures. You allocate with intention rather than suspicion. Giving is no longer a performance, it is participation in flow. You support what you value and expect circulation to return through clean channels. When a cost appears, you don't rehearse grievance. You ask, "What is the cleanest cause I can plant here?" Then you pay with gratitude and move forward, keeping the current free of resentment's debris. Relationships become laboratories of the law. You stop demanding that others supply your unhealed places. Instead, you bring the cause you want reflected: respect, clarity, generosity, accountability. When conflict arrives, you refuse to treat it as fate. You ask, "What premise am I bringing into this exchange?" If it's defensiveness, you reset to curiosity. If it's superiority, you reset to service. Conversations that once spiraled now land. Misunderstandings that once lingered dissipate. The law is working in real time, cause reshapes effect. Health and presence receive the same treatment. You don't try to manifest vitality while violating your own body's requests. You align thought and action. Enough sleep, honest movement, clean food, deep breaths, each becomes an embodied agreement with the cause you hold. This kind of integrity transmits power. People feel it when you enter a room. Not bravado, not pretense, but coherence. Decision-making gets simpler, not because life offers fewer options, but because you now select by resonance with cause rather than by fear of loss. A useful filter emerges. Premise. Perception. Proceed. First, restate the premise: consciousness is cause. I plant clarity and value now. Second, check perception. Am I seeing through fear or through the premise? Third, proceed with a single clean action that agrees with the premise. You may still negotiate, research, and plan, but you do so from steadiness, not from the urge to outrun doubt. Feedback becomes data, not doom. A proposal lands flat. You don't shame yourself or curse the market. You review the cause. Was the intention muddied by anxiety? Was the offer aligned with genuine service? You adjust the inner instruction and iterate. This is how artisans work. They tune, test, refine. Living by the law is craftsmanship of consciousness. Rituals help keep the instrument tuned. Morning, 3 minutes to set the governing idea and name one concrete action that matches it. Midday, a brief reset, shoulders down, breath even, premise recalled. Evening, a small audit, not of outcomes but of causes. Where did I act from clarity? Where did I default to fear? What seed will I select for tomorrow? The point is not perfection, it's direction. Boundaries become an expression of respect for cause. You decline projects that would pay well but poison your attention. You take meetings only when there is a clear shared premise. You protect deep work from interruption because scattered attention sends static to the law. This isn't rigidity, it's conservation of power. By saying a clean no, you preserve the yes that aligns with your mandate. Service widens the channel. The more you contribute in ways that genuinely help others rise, the more the current finds roots back to you. You stop hustling for visibility and start delivering value that cannot be ignored. Supply follows usefulness like rivers follow gravity. Opportunities begin to feel less like hunts and more like matches your cause, meeting their need. When old reflexes flare, you do not dramatize them. You recognize the tug, breathe, and recenter. A late invoice arrives. The chest tightens. Instead of feeding the storm with, "It always happens to me," you return to sequence. Consciousness first. You place your attention on sufficiency, send the kind and firm follow-up, and carry on. Law handles the rest. If the payment delays, your steadiness remains. If the client falls away, space opens for alignment. Either way, effect is not your dictator. Living by the law also means allowing scale to match readiness. You don't yank sprouts into trees. You let growth pace itself, trusting that integrity compounds. 100 quiet, aligned actions executed over a season outperform one dramatic move fueled by panic. This is not small thinking, it's sustainable thinking. You are building a structure that will not collapse under its own weight. As this mode of living settles in, life feels less like a performance to manage and more like a covenant to honor. You keep your word because you've chosen words that you can keep. You deliver on promises because you made promises congruent with your design. The nervous system calms. Creativity returns. Work becomes more precise and strangely more enjoyable. Provision expands not as a prize for suffering, but as the predictable echo of law obeyed. And you notice something almost playful in the way results arrive. Emails show up at the exact hour you cleared the mental clutter. A referral comes the day after you forgave a lingering grievance. A solution appears in the shower after a week of grounded, premise-led effort. None of it is accident. It is the choreography of cause and effect in motion. This is the posture that prepares you for the next refinement. Once you are living by the law, provision stops feeling like a mountain to climb and starts behaving like the most natural outcome in the world, arriving without strain, finding you as you move with clarity, staying because your consciousness can host it. When consciousness steadies, supply stops behaving like a prize to be chased and begins appearing as a quiet companion that travels with you. Provision, once the object of desperate pursuit, now comes as the natural consequence of alignment. It is effortless, not because no work is required, but because the work is no longer strained. You are planting causes that harmonize with law, and the effects arrive in rhythm. Notice the change in atmosphere. Where once there was grasping, there is now ease. The email confirming the opportunity arrives just after you have released the panic about it. The conversation that once would have been tense now unfolds with cooperation. The bill that once seemed threatening is paid with calm, and another channel of income opens almost on cue. These are not miracles in the sense of suspending law. They are miracles in the truest sense law, revealed so clearly that you can no longer call it coincidence. A man who once lived in constant anxiety about provision discovered this shift slowly. At first he forced optimism, repeating phrases he didn't yet believe. But as his consciousness matured, he found himself less obsessed with the timing of supply. He trusted the seed. He trusted the process, and to his surprise, Supply began to meet him without the exhausting chase. Contracts arrived through introductions he never planned. Friendships deepened without strategizing. Health improved without endless analysis. Life was flowing because cause was clear. This ease is not passivity. You still take action, but the quality of action changes. Instead of scattering your energy, you act from clarity. Instead of grasping, you offer. Instead of chasing, you align. The actions may look ordinary, writing an email, making a call, showing up on time, but the consciousness behind them carries authority. And because law honors consciousness first, the effects multiply far beyond the effort. Provision without strain is not the absence of challenge. Storms will still come. Plans will still shift. But the difference is that you no longer treat these as threats to supply. You know that cause remains steady and effect must eventually follow. Even in apparent setbacks, you feel a strange composure. You may not know how the answer will appear, but you trust that it must. That trust is itself provision. It provides rest, clarity, and resilience, which in turn attract the very solutions you need. This posture also dismantles envy. When you see another's abundance, you no longer feel diminished. You understand that their supply is their reflection, not your loss. Their harvest is proof of law, and therefore proof that your own can ripen. You celebrate it as evidence that the soil is fertile, that the law is active, that cause indeed creates effect. Envy dissolves, replaced by expectancy. In this atmosphere, generosity becomes natural. You give because you are not afraid. You share ideas, resources, encouragement, because you know supply is not scarce, it flows according to consciousness, and consciousness is abundant. Each act of giving is not depletion, it is participation in circulation. You feel lighter, freer, more yourself. And the more you give with clarity, the more channels open for return, not as reward, but as rhythm. Eventually you realize that effortless provision is not about external possessions at all. It is about the state from which you live. To walk in calm assurance, to know that supply is effect and cannot escape cause, that is wealth in its purest form. Money may reflect it. Opportunities may echo it. Relationships may confirm it. But the essence of wealth is the inner steadiness that no outer fluctuation can touch. This realization prepares you for the final revelation, that the dawn never ends. Consciousness, once awakened, continues to renew itself, casting light into every corner of life, ensuring that supply will always answer, for effect cannot resist the eternal sunrise of cause. The horizon glows with a permanence that words can only gesture toward. Dawn is not a single moment, it is a principle. Just as the sun rises without fail, consciousness creates without pause. This is the eternal sunrise, the unending rhythm of cause giving birth to effect, of inner thought shaping outer form. When you stand in this realization, life takes on a steady brilliance. You no longer wait anxiously for supply. You expect it with the same confidence you expect morning to follow night. Think of how the cycle has carried you. You awoke to the first light, learned to recognize cause as the seed, faced illusions of lack, confronted shadows of fear, practiced discipline, felt the current of power, and discovered provision without strain. Each step has been a widening of horizon, a deepening of trust, a rising into clarity. And now you see that this journey has no ending point. It is not a chapter to close, but a posture to carry. One man, years after his first awakening, reflected on how much had changed. He was not merely wealthier, he was freer. Not because life spared him challenges, there were still setbacks, storms, and losses, but because he no longer mistook them for ultimate truth. He had learned to live from cause. He held the dawn within, and so, even in the darkest nights, he knew light was already stirring. His supply did not depend on outer stability. It arose from an inner sunrise that nothing could extinguish. This realization becomes your own. You do not fear tomorrow because you know the law is impartial and eternal. You do not clutch at today's supply because you know it is only a reflection, and reflection will continue as long as the light within shines. You no longer live as a beggar at the mirror. You live as the one who shapes what the mirror must display. The eternal sunrise is not a promise of unbroken ease. It is the assurance of unbroken law. Seasons will turn, appearances will shift, but consciousness remains the origin. As long as you guard it, cultivate it, and align it with truth, effect must follow. You walk with the calm authority of one who understands sequence. Consciousness first, supply after. And with that understanding, fear loses its throne, doubt loses its voice, and lack loses its mask. Stand in this awareness and let it saturate you. The dawn is endless. The Church of the Dawn is not a building or a ritual. It is this recognition alive in you. Wherever you go, you carry its light. Whatever you face, you answer with cause. Whatever supply appears, you honor it as effect, never master. You have crossed from striving into knowing, from chasing into creating, from waiting into being. And now, as the journey's arc completes, you realize there is no conclusion, only continuation. The eternal sunrise will meet you again tomorrow and the day after, and in every moment you choose to remember. Consciousness is cause, supply is effect. The law abides, and you abide in it. Slow your pace now. Let the weight of these truths settle, not as lofty concepts, but as companions you can carry into tomorrow. You have walked through the night of illusion and stood in the dawn of recognition. You have seen how fear disguises itself as lack, how doubt bends perception, how shadows yield to a single unwavering light. More than that, you have learned that this light is not outside you, it is you. Take a breath and notice the quiet authority within. You do not need to chase what is already flowing toward you. You do not need to beg for what consciousness has already planted. Each thought, each belief, each quiet choice is a seed, and the soil of law is faithful. Effects must follow. You are not helpless, you are cause. As you rest in this, feel the difference between striving and allowing. Striving scrambles for reflections, exhausting itself in mirrors. Allowing remembers the origin, tending the root, trusting the process. Striving leaves you empty even when you grasp supply. Allowing leaves you steady even when supply has not yet appeared, because you know it must. Let this wind down remind you that abundance is not an event, it is an atmosphere. Peace, clarity, gratitude, expectancy. These are not waiting at the end of your achievements. They are available now because they are born in consciousness, and consciousness is always within reach. As you close this day, picture the horizon of your life glowing with first light. No matter what shadows you face, the dawn is already rising. And as long as you remember the sequence consciousness first, supply after, you will never again fear the night. The sunrise is eternal, and it is yours.